Welcome to Rivers in the Wasteland. I'm your host, Amanda Williams, and today I get to introduce you to my friend, Hannah McLeod. She shares how God built her faith throughout the years in preparation for her biggest trial to date, her son's life-threatening cancer diagnosis. Her faith is inspiring, her attitude is contagious, and what God did for her family is nothing short of miraculous. Here's my conversation with Hannah McLeod. Hannah, thank you for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here.
So, fun fact, I have never actually met Hannah. I only know her from Instagram, and I feel like that's becoming a recurring theme on the podcast. I swear I have friends in real life. Anyways, I am so thankful to have her here with us because Hannah has an amazing story that she has been through over the last couple of years. Has it been a couple of years yet, or just a year?
A little more than a year.
A little more than a year. Okay, so she has been through it with her little guy. His name is Peter, and we will get to that. But before we do, I just wanted to kind of give Hannah an opportunity to introduce herself to us and talk a little bit about how she grew up and her relationship with God growing up and kind of how she got to where she is today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah McLeod. I live in Spokane, Washington, with my husband, my 2 boys, and I have a girl on the way. Yay. Which is very exciting. I know. I can actually make girls. I was very stoked about that.
Yeah.
So I grew up with Christian parents, going to church, and I accepted Jesus into my heart when I was 5 years old.
No.
And of course, I didn't know the extent of what that meant, but I do think it was genuine and it was real. And I think he came into my heart, and I've been walking with him ever since. And it's been, as a kid, maybe slow growth, but I never really had a turning away point. And for a long time, I didn't like that. I wanted this dramatic story of rebellion and then redemption and all of this stuff. And it wasn't until I think about 7 years ago, I was sharing my testimony with a new small group. And I kind of shared, I was like, oh yeah, I've got the boring testimony. And one of the girls in the group said, Hannah, that is so beautiful because it gives me hope for my son. She had a 6-month-old at the time. It gives me hope that my son doesn't have to have a story like mine. Because, she did have the turning away and the abuse and the hurt and so much pain in her story. She's like, it gives me so much hope that my kid can have a story like yours. And it made me shift the way I saw my story.
Yes.
And so now I'm very thankful for it. And now that I have kids, I'm like, okay, it's possible. Let's get you to love Jesus at a young age and walk with him.
It's really interesting that you said that because we had a whole discussion about this at our small group a couple months ago because we have a couple people in the group who have always walked with the Lord, and they have said the exact same thing, that it feels so boring. They've never really been through anything tough. And it's just kind of crazy how you compare stories like that, like the prodigal stories and the radical testimonies. You almost think, I think the enemy uses that comparison to make you feel like you don't have anything to offer. But I love what your friend said, because it's absolutely a testimony of its own that you were able to stand firm on the Lord and walk through, because I'm sure you had opportunities for running away or walking away or whatever. And just that consistency and that resolve, it is a testimony of his faithfulness. And yet, praise the Lord for those testimonies, because as a parent, that's the goal. One of the goals, like you want your kids don't have to go through that. So yes, that is a great testimony.
Thank you.
So you've had that experience. You've always walked with the Lord. And I think that when we first started talking, you mentioned that there were a couple things in your life that had been more desert seasons or difficult things that you had gone through, or maybe you didn't necessarily turn away from the Lord, but you really were challenged. And so I want to give you the opportunity to share those with us.
Totally. So the very first one, when I think of a desert in my life, a time where my faith wasn't as strong, there's definitely a year, and it was my sophomore year in college. I went to a Christian college here in Washington, And I was feeling very lonely. Like my freshman year was super fun. I lived in the all freshman dorm. Everyone wanted to be friends. It was just super fun. And then sophomore year, I just felt a lot more isolated. It felt harder to connect with the friends that I had because we were all living in different dorms. And I wasn't purposefully rejecting God. I just kind of let college life get in the way. And I stopped reading my Bible and really pursuing my faith. I wasn't, like I said, purposely turning away. I just, got busy and didn't prioritize it. And it was probably the first 6 months or so, started feeling more depressed, down. And I'd never really felt that way before. That wasn't really a part of my upbringing and part of my story to that point. And it just got to a point where I was like, what is going on? Like I know, certain friendships have fallen away, but this is deeper. And I don't know why I didn't realize it, but it was that light bulb moment of, oh, I stopped reading my Bible and I am not walking with the Lord closely. We're in a relationship, but it's distant. And so I made a decision. I was like, okay, from now on, I'm actually going to start reading my Bible, doing a devotional, doing something where I am intentional with my faith, not just saying, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but actually pursuing a relationship with the Lord. And it just kind of grew from there. I think since sophomore year of high school, I have had a quiet time or whatever you wanted to call it consistently because I saw that I did not like any aspect of what was happening when I didn't. And so that was 2008-ish. So then in 2010, I had my first breakup. I didn't really have boyfriends in high school, beginning of college, but had one at the end of college, and he broke my little heart. Oh. And I remember, we didn't even date that long. I was like, this is the first one and it's going to be it. And I think it was just really painful because we were friends and he really liked me. And I finally was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. And then after 6 months, he was like, nah, I'm just not feeling it. And so I was like, okay, so he got to know me and he didn't like it. And so right away,
way to look at it. Yeah.
Right away, that first night, I just got the verse from Malachi 3:6, I, the Lord, do not change. Because that was what was hurting me the most. I was like, he just changed his mind. It felt like it came out of nowhere. And God reminded me, hey, I will never change, no matter what. So I kind of clung on to that, 2010. Fast forward, 2018 was kind of my next hard thing. In there, I met my husband, got married. It was great. In 2018, we got pregnant for the first time. And then we miscarried that baby. And it was so interesting because up until the miscarriage happened, I kept getting from church, from different books, from devotionals, just in my head, the phrase, God, you were so good. And I remember when I had that positive pregnancy test, be like, yes, God, you were so good. And then in the ultrasound room, when we found out that our baby was gone, the first thing I still thought was, wow, God, you are good. This is the first time that my faith, I've actually had something hard go against it. And like, do I still believe this? And I do. And some of the verses that's from is 1 Chronicles 16:34. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Psalm 145:9. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. And Psalm 34:8. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. So that was a whole season of still pain, but a lot of growth and trust and feeling God's peace right away, and healing through that. And then with that, once we got pregnant again, pretty fast, learning to not let fear dictate my life, because I was super scared going into that first ultrasound with my son, Jack, just because that's when my life kind of crumbled before. But then after that ultrasound and everything was fine, the fear was not gone. The fear was still there. And I was like, oh, okay. I can be fearful for the rest of my life, because even once a kid comes out, then they have the whole world. And so I kind of made a decision that I would, fear is going to come, but I will take my thoughts captive and I will not dwell on them. I will turn them away and say, you're not welcome here, and focus on something else. So that was another big shift. Then in 2021, my mom passed away from cancer. She had a long 8-year battle with it. And so pretty much right when she passed, we were all just joyful. She was with Jesus. She loved the Lord. And it was her time. It was time to go. And we had so much promises of hope and joy, and just the reminder that God's going to wipe away every tear, and there's going to be no more death or sorrow or pain, as Revelation says. And so that, although I guess it, your mom passing away, like, that's a hard thing, it didn't actually feel hard. It felt, okay, like this is just what was meant to happen. We prayed for healing. Healing didn't come this side of heaven, but we all felt joy when she went to be with Jesus.
I love the fact that you kind of had the opportunity to go back and think of all of those different things, especially with your mom's story. I really feel like all of these things leading up to that, and all of these things, including your mom's story, that are leading up to your most recent testimony with your son, I feel like it almost looks like this picture of preparation, and that your faith has been building and building and building. God kind of started it with this guy that you only dated for 6 months, and it started there with something a little bit smaller, and started speaking to you and pursuing you and preparing your heart for bigger things. And I love when we can learn things when the stakes are smaller, and then we are prepared for battle when the stakes are higher. I definitely wanted to leave some time for us to talk about Peter. And I think that I remember seeing your story about him. I think it was kind of after it had been going on for a little while, because you know how Instagram is weird, like it doesn't always show you everyone. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, what is going on with that baby? What is happening? Because you started sharing pictures of him. So why don't you share with us about Peter? When did it happen? What started everything? How did you even know that there was something going on with him?
Totally. So it started out as just a really tiny bump near his eye. I mean, at first it was actually just a red thing where someone noticed and said, "Oh, did he hit his face this morning?" And I was like, "No, I've been watching him all morning. Nope, weird." And so,
how old was he at this time?
4 months.
4 months, okay.
And we were actually at an appointment for his ear, because one of his ears, he was born with it being deformed. It's not even open. So we were actually at an appointment for that. And one of those nurses was the one who kind of caught that, which was so funny, because that at the time seemed like a big deal that he couldn't hear out of one side. Oh, now it seems like not a big deal at all. But
perspective, right?
Perspective shift. So I talked to our pediatrician, sent him a picture. We had a well check scheduled already for 2 weeks. And he said, "I think it's a dermoid cyst. Let's wait 2 weeks till you come in and we'll see." When we went in, it had grown a tiny bit, not much. And he said, "Yeah, I think this is a dermoid cyst. Pretty much it'll keep growing until we drain it. It's a really boring surgery. Nothing to worry about." So it takes a while to get through the process of seeing a dermatologist and getting things scheduled. And so it was another two or 3 weeks before we had our appointment scheduled. And in this time, it started growing more rapidly, this bump by his eye. But we kept convincing ourselves, no, they said it would keep growing. We didn't Google what dermoid cysts normally look like. We probably should have, but as a parent, I'm not a Googling parent. I don't want to know worst case scenarios. I just don't go there.
So tell you you're going to die.
Exactly. And so we didn't Google anything. We just said, hey, it's growing. They said it would grow. It's going to be fine. So when we finally got into the dermatologist, they very quickly were like, this is not a dermoid cyst. You need to figure this out pronto. So took him immediately to get an ultrasound, which the ultrasound pretty much just confirmed that there was a mass by his eye, but, they couldn't tell us what it was. And so we were in the process of getting in to see someone who would be able to schedule an MRI. But over the weekend, we ended up taking him to the ER because the swelling had just gotten so massive and it started swelling into his eye. And I have one of my best friends actually she used to work in peds oncology, and now she works in the peds emergency room. So she was a great resource to have. I was like, when do I take him in? Sending her pictures, and she's like, okay, yes, this is a sign. Take him in. So that got the ball rolling to get an emergency MRI, biopsy, all of that stuff. And so then I think it took maybe 2 days for them to actually give us the diagnosis of a malignant rhabdoid tumor. There are about 20 to 25 cases in the U.S. each year, and they didn't give us a prognosis, but we did Google that one, and he had an 8% chance of living at his age. So we were not super stoked with those odds.
What did that feel like for you to have that number in your mind?
I think it was almost in a way helpful, because I think it was a 50-50 chance. There would be this weird hope in the doctors, I think. And the 8% chance, I was like, he is going to die unless God decides to do something big and let us keep him. So I think it was very quickly like, okay, God, like, this is us right here. We are going to figure this out, you and me. And yeah, so it was devastating, to say the least. But very quickly, just a lot of perspective shifts, a lot of walls broken down, and choosing to take it day by day. Yeah. Mostly because within that first week, right after the diagnosis, me and my husband were just a mess, because we were thinking through all of the what ifs and thinking about future Christmases, and Peter was not part of any of these future plans or thoughts.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't deal. But we were like, God gave him to us for this time, however long this time is. And we are going to be his comfort, because that was one of my husband's greatest fear. Not necessarily him dying. Like, yes, that was a fear, but that he would suffer. And very quickly, God said, I gave you as his comfort, both with breastfeeding and just being his mom, and, babies like to snuggle and all that stuff. So just feeling like I can be his comfort through this process. And then, just remembering that God promises strength for the day. He tells us to not worry about tomorrow. And one of my husband's favorite analogies is the Israelites, when they left Egypt and they were in the wilderness and starving, and they asked God for food, and he gave them manna, but they could only collect enough for the day. If they tried to collect more, it would rot and get maggots. And so they had to trust God every single day that he was going to provide what they needed for the day. And so my husband's little phrase that we now have is manna for the day. Every morning we would wake up and pray for strength to get through that day. And we decided that we were not going to worry about the future or look to the future or do any of that. And we had to constantly remind each other of that back and forth. Manna for the day. Like, it's today, he's still here. And then with that, also trying to cherish the time that we did have, since we didn't know how long it was. We're like, right now, he's still really happy. And he seems normal, other than he looks funny, but like, he's still here. The days are generally really good. So we're not going to waste the good days that we have worrying about future bad days or future days that we don't have him. Because if we do, we're going to kick ourselves being like, what were we doing worrying when he was still with us? So kind of that initial process.
That's such a great perspective. Just how much we dwell on things that we cannot control and waste moments that would normally be fine, except we are tainting them with worry and we're robbing ourselves of the goodness of the day. And wow, that is so great that you guys were able to come to that conclusion and that you're able to remind yourselves of that. It sounds like you guys are pretty good teammates in that way.
We are. Yeah.
How long have you guys been married?
10 years.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was interesting, God's timing in everything. So the diagnosis happened in November. And just a few months earlier, in August, we actually had a really hard just marriage conversation where my husband came to me and he was like, I'm not happy. Like, it exploded into this huge thing where we realized that we were kind of pushing things under the rug and we weren't on the same page and we weren't as strong and things were not going as well as we thought / like put off to other people or even tried to convince ourselves of.
Sure.
And in our marriage, we have said from day one, divorce isn't on the table and never will be.
Yeah.
That's just not. No.
You're like, we're going to stay married. We'd like to be happy.
We'd like to be happy. And so we're like, so the way that we're actually going to fight for our marriage is we're going to lift up that rug and we're going to talk about things that we don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to just shove everything under the rug, especially with 2 little kids. Let's not worry about it. Because, I mean, at that point, Peter had just turned 2 months old. So, I mean, we're still in the throes of newborn with a toddler.
It's like survival. Yeah.
It is. And so, like, are we really doing this right now? And we didn't do it right then because people were coming over in 15 minutes. So
why did we always happen that way? Why?
I know. So we actually ended up waiting. It all festered for 2 weeks until we had our anniversary date. And then we topped it all out. It was good. It was redemptive and beautiful. But it got us back on track. And looking back, I'm like, wow, that conversation really needed to happen to get us on the same page.
Wow.
And that we actually were honest with each other through this journey. Because if that hadn't have happened, I'm actually not sure how much of a team we could have been. Because there was a lot of kind of unsaid bitterness and just the devil kind of like creeping in that we were able to get out. Get out. And so, yeah, that was also
so
huge.
Just like the Lord. He's like, okay, I'm going to help you guys out. You're all a hot mess. I'm here to help you and get you guys into the right posture to go into this battle because you wouldn't have, you would have probably been a little bit more floundering than you were. It sounds like you guys are pretty united in going into this season. And gosh, I just feel like that is so, it's just like God. He just knows. He knows what we need.
Yeah.
And he doesn't let us, he pushes us into what we need to handle when we need to handle it. Almost like he lets us like be a mess for a little while, but then when he's done, he's like, you guys need to get together. You guys need to handle this because he sees what's coming. And he can see all of it. And he's like, I chose you for each other. You chose each other too. Now I'm going to walk you through a valley and I need you to walk hand in hand. And that is such a powerful thing that he did for you.
Yeah, 100%.
Wow. So I love that. Now, what's your husband's name?
Richard.
Richard. Good job, Richard. Way to go. Way to bring up something hard right before people are coming over for dinner.
Oh, it was great.
We can't talk about this now. We're happy, dang it. Go answer the door.
To make it better, it was actually, we were hosting our very first neighborhood potluck because we had just moved in and we decided we wanted to be those neighbors. So not only was it people coming over, it was our entire cul-de-sac that we had never met.
Awesome.
So it was great. It was great.
You can just picture it. Yep. I love it. It always happens like that. Oh man. Well, good job, you guys. That's really great to be able to get to that point. And Peter was probably just, how great for him that he was able to have you guys in such a redeemed place to show up for him united. So tell us about, once he got checked into the ER, did he pretty much stay there or was he able to go home with you?
He was able to go home after a day or two.
Okay.
I would spend at least one night in the hospital because with the biopsy, his entire eye got crusted shut and there was so much swelling that they wanted to make sure that he was okay because that was considered a surgery, even though they just, did a biopsy. But we were able, I think it was the next day, we were able to go home.
So what did they tell you was the plan then at that point? Like when they told you what the tumor was, what was the plan for you guys to move forward?
The plan at that time was about 10 months of chemo, starting out with 1 month of chemo, hoping to shrink the tumor. Surgery over in Seattle. We're on the opposite side of Washington State than Seattle, just because there's a better surgeon in Seattle for this specific tumor type. Surgery to try to get as much of it out as possible. Radiation right after that's done, as soon as he's healed enough for the radiation, and then the rest of the chemo.
Wow.
So chemo, surgery, radiation, more chemo.
That's a lot for a little guy.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that plan at first?
I think I just kind of took it as I cannot think of this as the whole thing because I was like, this is our next year or so. And because they said this will go through, probably October, and they're telling me this in November. And a year is a long time. So I was like, I just can't even comprehend that. So that was part of the, I can't focus on the future. I will focus on one cycle at a time. What is the next thing that we need to do? But the one thing that I felt like God told me, not in an audible voice, but I was like, okay, I feel like this is God, was telling me to trust the doctors.
Ooh.
That was kind of the one direction he gave me, was just do what they say. I will help direct their path. And you don't have to, try to do all this other research, because I hate research. That is not my thing. Even when my mom had cancer, I left it to them because my dad and her loved research. I was like, you guys will figure that out.
Yeah.
I hate it. I do not like to do research. And so I kind of also took that burden because the Lord knows me well. He knows I would not have handled that. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of peace of okay, well, at least they have a plan. It technically isn't for this specific type of tumor because it's so rare. There isn't a protocol specifically for it. It's a protocol for one that's, similar. But yeah, it's okay, whatever you guys tell me to do, we will do. And I am just going to take it one thing at a time.
Wow. So you started with chemo first. How did he handle that?
Really well. Yeah. He did 2 rounds. And of course, during the very first round, he also got RSV, which is one of the things with chemo is it goes in waves of suppressing your immune system. And so you're just more likely to get other things and then get hit harder by those things. And so this is beginning of December is when everything actually started. He got RSV. We just had to do 1 extra night in the hospital because he spiked a fever. And kids with going through chemotherapy, pretty much if their fever is 100.3, you go to the ER because he also, before this, I don't remember exactly when, but sometime before chemo started, he got 2 tubes put in his chest, which we were actually very thankful for because one of the biggest and most oh, what is that word? I can't even think. Hardest, like traumatic. One of the most traumatic things in the whole thing was them trying to get an IV in him in the emergency room. Because he's just so little. And even now, he is so hard to get an IV in. His veins move. When they get it, they blow. It's just, him with IVs is not good. And so our 2 experiences with that were just terrible. And so from the time he got his tubes in his chest, he never had to get an IV again, because anytime they need to draw blood, they do it from there. All the chemo is hooked up through these tubes. This is something you don't know until you're actually doing it. But the tubes, there's a dressing over it, but it is an open source of infection. So I had to learn how to clean it and flush it every day. And that just became part of our process. But that's also why if they get any type of fever, you have to go in, because they're afraid of an infection in the line, because it's directly into their bloodstream.
Wow.
So anyway, all of that. He did get RSV, but he did pretty good. There were times when his, immune system was down, but, he still acted fine. And we had a good arsenal of Zofran and other drugs that we could give him if this symptom happened or that one. And so, he ended up doing good. We didn't get to go to a Christmas Eve service because his immune system was down. And Christmas morning, my dad came over with a mask on. It just felt weird, but like, this is life right now. We have to be more careful.
Yeah, for sure. That's so great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you guys did your chemo, and then you moved on to the next step, which was the surgery, right?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about that.
This is the best part of the story. The best part. So he had finished his 2 rounds of chemo, next surgery, in January on his 7-month birthday over in Seattle. So we flew over there, and after his biopsy, a lot of the swelling in his eye had gone down. But before we started chemo, we saw the tumor actually growing again. So we're like, okay, like, this is a fast growing tumor. And with the chemo, it started shrinking a little bit. I'm like, okay, like, it's responding. This is great. So when we got to Seattle, they're expecting this big, massive surgery, which it was. They opened him up. He has this cool zigzag scar across his entire skull because they opened him up, removed his temporalis muscle, moved tissue from one side of his head to the other to fill in where that muscle was, and then closed him all up. So he has this crazy cut in his head. But they called us back after the surgery and said, so we opened him up and we couldn't see any tumor. We're like, what? You couldn't see any tumor? They're like, yeah, we couldn't see it, but, we still took out his temporalis muscle and, made sure we got all of the margins, but we're sending it to pathology. They're going to find traces of cancer in it. But we feel good about this. And so then, I don't know how many days later it was, but pathology came back and they could not find a single trace of cancer anywhere in the entire specimen that they removed. So, in like our speak, the cancer just was gone, which does not happen with this type of tumor. And so, we're trying to get the doctors to call it a miracle. They won't. Their exact words that they kept going back to was he had a remarkable response to the chemo. I'm like, yes. We had thousands of people praying for him, and even for, this specific thing, but you pray the big prayers.
Yeah.
But you don't actually expect the big prayer to be answered, but it was just gone. And one of my really good friends afterwards, actually, she told me that she had this image in her mind of God's thumb just wiping away the tumor, just one stroke of his thumb wiping it away. And that's what I've always kind of thought of now, is like, that's what he did, is he just got rid of it.
Wow.
I was like, oh yeah, that just happened. And Richard was a little more like, okay, like, but like, I think he was really scared to accept that a miracle had happened because he didn't want to be like on a high and then have his son taken away from him still.
Sure. Yeah.
So there was that like, is this for real life? Like, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You must watch Bluey because you just said, is this for real life?
I do watch Bluey. Yes.
We're a big Bluey household over here. But yeah, you guys got a miracle.
We did.
He did a miracle. He healed Peter.
He did. Straight up.
It's not a remarkable response to the chemo. It's God doing something remarkable. And man, I love how you, from the beginning of this, when you found this out, I feel like you shouted it from the digital rooftops, because I remember scrolling one day and seeing you post that, and I literally feel like I jumped out of my chair because I had been praying it. I think I remember messaging you when I first saw you come back on. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it's so funny because like we really don't know each other very well, but I feel like I connected to your story. And I remember seeing when you posted about the miracle, and I was like, shut the front door. That just happened. God freaking did it. Like, he did the miracle that we were all praying for. He's just so good. And it goes back to what you said, before, that God, he's good.
He's good. And that's the other thing. I think, initial response was honestly shock. Not that God could heal, but that he did heal in our specific scenario, because I had already decided in my heart, when I pretty much thought that 100% we were losing Peter, I was like, God, I'm going to give you glory no matter what. I am not going to be on here singing your praises while things are good. But if you turn against me, I'm going to turn everyone against you. I was like, no, I am going to trust you and love you and serve you and shout your goodness now while things are good. But I will also shout your goodness when you take Peter from me, whenever that is. And so in my head, I was like, how is God going to get the most glory? Dang it. It's going to be when my kid dies and I still praise him. That sucks, but okay, well, here we go. Like, perhaps I was created for such a time as this, as Esther says. And so when he healed Peter, I was like, oh, curveball. That's awesome. But like, I was fully expecting God to take my son and still give him the glory. So I was just shocked. I was like, okay, I'm going to make sure you get lots of glory now, because
don't you feel like that has something to do with it though? Because I feel like the Lord honors the hearts of his children that point to him and who are ready to do what you just said, to give him glory no matter what. And I know that we want to be careful not to make things about us, because it is by the grace of God that he does things. But I think it's also really important to know that I think that the Lord delights in giving good things to his children. And when we have that heart posture, when we are literally standing here like, no matter what, even if it's that story, even if we know that he can save us, but even if he doesn't, I will not, turn away from the Lord, or I will not serve anybody else. Like, when we have that resolve, gosh, I just feel like he wants to pour it out on us even more, because I know I would do that as a parent. Like, if I know that my kid is acting a certain way and it like just really pleases me, it just makes me want to pour on all the good. And I just can't imagine that it doesn't work the same way. I mean, I can't think of a verse specifically that says that, but I know that he's good and it talks about him giving good things to us. And, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to go look something up because I just feel like that is just so like him, Does that sound right?
It does. It sure does. Yeah. And I mean, we still hold it loosely. We know and are convinced we know God did the miracle. Does that mean that Peter is going to outlive us? No. Could the cancer come back? Yeah. Like, this doesn't all of a sudden mean that, now we can just forget all of this and whatever. We're like, we still are going to hold him and Jack and our future daughter. Like, it has just taught us open hands. Yeah. Of like, you don't open your hands and then close them again. And it's like, okay, the rest of our lives are just open to you and what you're going to do and the story that you're writing. And my life isn't really my own. It's your story. And I just get to be part of it. And I want to be a joyful, giving, encouraging part of the story that I get to play here. I don't want to be someone who's on this earth complaining and just feeling like it's all about me, woe is me, all of this stuff, because that doesn't feel good to anybody. And it doesn't help anybody. And no, God is not glorified with that. And so, yeah, it's kind of just been that little shift of like, what is my life about? And this has kind of opened my eyes to be that reminder of like, oh yeah, this, whatever happens.
I really do feel like you're getting a gift. Like, I feel like that was God's gift to you for honoring him in that way, like honoring him with your attitude, honoring him with your resolve in praising him and glorifying him. I feel like that is a gift. Like, he's like, man, that's my girl. I want to bless her with this. I want to show up for her. And, he wants to show up for all of us. But I just think that there's something special about when we are laying it down before him. I really just feel like he's like, oh man, yep, I want to do this. Yeah. Wow. That's so good. Did you have a specific scripture that you felt like was like right dear to your heart during this whole specific time?
I think that Esther verse, perhaps you were created for such a time as this, was a big one. Esther 4:14. Just kind of reminding me of like, God's been preparing you for this.
Yeah.
Philippians 4:7. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That was just that good reminder of just truth. And then pretty much every verse on suffering just had a different weight to them, where I was like, oh yeah, no, this does make sense. 1 Peter 5:10, after you have suffered a little while, God himself will restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. Romans 5:3-5, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our heart through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. And then finally, James 1:2-4, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I think before all of this, I'd read those verses and I'd fear the suffering and be like, I don't want to suffer. I'm like, that's terrible. But now it was like, okay, this last year has had its moments of suffering. I think this counts. But just seeing where it says it'll make you strong, firm, and steadfast. It's going to make you mature. It's going to give you hope. All of that stuff, I can now look to those scriptures and say, yes, it does. it is true. You can believe this. Like, I feel more strong, firm, and steadfast than I ever have before. No matter what life will continue to throw at me, I'm like, no, I am firm. Like, we're good. And so it's really cool to now be able to stand on those verses instead of just know them and be like, I hope that's true. But now I can turn around and say they are true.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like there's probably a piece of that in itself that will be something that you can use to minister to people who are going to be in a season of suffering. And you have this testimony now where you can say, look, I have been through this fire and I was able to come out the other side. And this is it. Like, this is what you can stand on and it will hold true. Like, you'll get to the other side and you'll feel it too. I just think it's so cool.
Thank you. It's been wild.
I'm so glad that you were willing to hang out with me on here and tell me all the details.
Yeah.
And I just love this bright spot that his story has left on the internet. He's such a bright, happy boy, and he's been through so much, and he doesn't even realize like what has happened, but he literally, like, he is a walking miracle. And the story that he has just from being so little. And wow, it's just so cool. And he's going to have the coolest story about his scar.
Which now his hair is growing back, so you like can barely even see it through the hair. So like, eventually he's going to have to just shave his head just so he can see his own scar.
Yeah, I mean, he will. He'll be like, have this battle wound. I have to show people, Mom, shave my head. Wow, very cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners?
I think the other thing was one of the biggest takeaways that I got from this last year was just the reminder that hard is hard. I think when people view someone whose, child had cancer, they all of a sudden be like, well, my hard isn't that hard, and they don't feel like it's worth sharing, or I don't know, sometimes even like asking for prayer for, or whatever it is, because we compare our level of difficulty, suffering, whatever.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, as someone who has technically been through one of the things that, go in the more extreme category of hard, like, no, there are no categories. Even if it's like your dog is sick, if that's hard to you, that's hard. Okay, like, go to God with it. Right? Ask for prayer for it. It's not silly, because this is the feeling that you are feeling.
Yeah.
And God wants to come alongside you in that. Obviously, our feelings aren't everything, but they matter. They matter to God, and they matter to your community. And there was just so many people, because I got so many messages,
I'm sure,
throughout all of it, all ranging in different things. And a lot of it, I could see the hurt that people were going through, and they were ashamed to admit it, or ashamed to talk to me about it.
Sure.
And I was like, I would love to be there for you and, pray for you, or just be a listening ear.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be ashamed that your hard is not a kid with cancer.
Yeah.
Like, I hope you never have to experience that and walk through that. Well, part of me actually hopes you do, if you're going to come out firm, strong, steadfast. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't wish hard on people. But that was just a big thing that I learned, is that, it's God's there through all of it. The big, the little. He knows it all already.
Absolutely. I feel like people say that to me because we have 4 kids now, and people, if they have like 1 kid or maybe 2, usually people with 3 don't say it because they already have their own crazy, but usually people with 1 or 2 kids will say things like, oh, it's nothing compared to what you have. And I'm like, no. When you have 1 kid, that is its own kind of hard. When you have 2 kids, that is its own kind of hard. Like, it really is not. It's not a contest.
That's,
not a contest. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight and sharing Peter's story and your story. I'm so so happy for you and cannot wait to share this story with our community, because I just know that it's going to bring people joy and give them so much encouragement to know that you can walk through suffering and come back. Remind me the word: strong, firm, steadfast. Is that it? Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Well, that is all we have tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Wow. I just absolutely love this story. Before I wrap it up, I really feel like we need to acknowledge that God can use all things. Just because they did chemo does not take away from the miraculous results they got. It can be both. We can believe in miracles and accept the advantages of modern medicine because all good things come from God, right? Hannah's story reminds me of how strategic God is when it comes to lining things up in our lives and making sure that nothing is wasted. It seems as if every lesson she learned along the way proved that the tears and the heartache were worth it. She gained an unshakable faith, and her dedication to glorifying God no matter what set the stage for God to give her a miracle. Thank you for joining me today. If this episode resonated with you, or if this podcast has been a blessing in your life, please leave a review on your favorite platform. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified of all upcoming episodes. Remember that God is at work today in mighty ways to make rivers in the wasteland. If He can do it for us, I know He can do it for you.